you, everyone, for attending the 5th National HREC Conference over these 3 days. This year, we are focusing on practical strategies for ethics committees. This conference has now turned from a smaller event of 600 registrants in 2020 to today, 2,400 registrants as of yesterday. An amazing increase, as I'm sure you'll agree, and probably really defines the fact that this conference fills a niche left behind many years ago when conferences run by the National Health and Medical Research Council stopped. So let me go no further, of course, before acknowledging from where I am, the traditional owners of the land on which this meeting is taking place, in our case, the Turrbal and Yagara lands of Brisbane. Let me pay my respects to their elders, past and present, acknowledge those who will be elders in their own time, but also recognize that continuing cultural, traditional connection to land, sea, community, and culture. Now, luckily, we have someone much better placed than I to provide an acknowledgement of country. But before I hand over to Greg Pratt, let me just provide some words of hello in different languages of the respective lands, and recognize that we have participants today from all over Australia, from the Wurundjeri in Melbourne, the Ngunnawal in Canberra, and the Gadigal in Sydney. And now let me hand over to Greg Pratt from Central Queensland University, who will do a formal acknowledgement of country. Greg, great to see you, and thanks for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me, Gordon, and thank you for getting the opportunity to be a part, even though only a small part today. You'll have to excuse my hair. I'm at a workshop for the rest of the week. I'm actually in Cairns, so I'm on Gimoy and Yidinji country today. Look, in line with protocol, I would like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the lands, as Gordon mentioned, where you join in from today. I'd just like to say for a second, just a little bit of historical context to why we do a welcome and acknowledgement. So it's not a thing that came in from colonization. It's a thing that predates actually, Europeans arriving here and, claiming this space as Australia. And it is actually something we were expected to do going back some 60, 80,000 years. So the history of that is if you went onto somebody's country and you did not acknowledge that you were on their country, and they did not welcome you onto that country, you get in a lot of trouble. And I don't just mean a slap on the wrist and a fine. So people could get a spear in the leg, or they could be sung, which is, puri puri for those that don't know, or they could be, severely reprimanded. And the way we would traditionally do an acknowledgement and wait to be welcomed on country is we would go to a space, usually on top of a mountain, and we would start a fire, a small fire, and we would wait for the people who are the traditional owners of that country to come and welcome us onto that space. So we would acknowledge the space, and we would then wait for the traditional owners to come and allow us to be on that space. So just a little bit of background, because I think it does put into perspective why we do a welcome and acknowledgement. So unfortunately today, we're not doing a welcome because we don't have traditional owners who could welcome us to the entirety of this massive continent. But I'm very, very pleased to see that Gordon actually acknowledged a number of the some 400, traditional countries and nations that existed here pre-European colonization. So my respects to wherever you're dialing in. If you could just place in the chat where you are currently located and pay your respects to those traditional owners, that would be wonderful. So as I said, I'm joining you today from Yidinji and Gimoy country in Cairns. I'm a traditional owner for the Moreton Bay region, so just outside of it's part of the outer Brisbane region. The Quandamooka Nation and Ngunnawal tribe, descendant of the Brown family. And I, as Gordon mentioned, am a principal research fellow at CQ University. So, I'll let Gordon, welcome you as the chair. And like I say, I acknowledge the peoples whose lands we meet on today. And thank you all for being here and for taking part in this. And I'm sorry I'm not going to be able to participate in today's discussions and information sessions. I'm sure it'd be wonderful, as it always is. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Greg. And of course, even Greg, should you wish to keep up to date with what happens at this conference, all videos will be available online after the conference. So you can learn about some of the things we'll be hearing about in the next 3 days. And I hope everyone will join me in thanking Greg for that acknowledgement of country and recognize the importance of such an acknowledgement in our current culture. Thank you so much, Greg. Okay, so let me move forward here. Darn it. Okay, so before I move on, let me thank the organizing committee for this conference. As you can see here, Eleanor Milligan, Paula Swapman, Hudson Burden, Natasha Roberts, Nick Zepps, Sophie Gatenby, and Sarah Hubbard. And many of these have been with us throughout the last 5 years. They really helped to make this conference a success, helping to suggest speakers and panelists. And of course, this conference would not be able to occur without our conference supporters, most notably Health Translation Queensland, and really Sarah Gottliebson, who for the last 5 conferences has assisted me to put on this conference. Sarah provides amazing logistical support, and quite frankly, the conference couldn't happen without her, and her and I have been through a few tricky moments over the past 4 to 5 years, but none that have been insurmountable. Thank you to Sarah's skill. Let me note Helios, which now incorporates Salinger Privacy, and we will of course hear from Andrea Kalea for a privacy session in the next few days. Praxis and Sally Armstrong, who provide ethics committee training. And I'm sure Sally will probably come on in the next few days and tell us about Praxis and how she's supporting the conference. And of course, Bellbury, who continue in their own way to support the conference. And I guess we'll leave that one there. So etiquette, housekeeping. Of course, we want you to ask questions, put them in the question box, put them in the chat box. Sarah has muted everyone, I believe. Although someone did note they couldn't find the mute button, and neither could I, but I think Sarah has muted everyone until such times as questions occur. All the presentations will be recorded and posted on the website. I say all, there's one exception, and we'll get to that at the time. We will send a feedback survey. What I will say about the feedback is we have, of course, every year we get feedback, and every year we listen to the feedback, and we have taken a lot of that on board. I'm sorry that we cannot make the conference shorter or make it 1 day a month for 3 months. Ultimately, this is an opportunity for people to attend if they wish to. The presentations will be online. You can attend anytime. You can go online and get them. They're an amazing training resource. So what we have focused on this year, amongst other things, is trying to provide practical examples for ethics committees. Sometimes if someone gives a talk, it's great, but how do you actually operationalize that? Well, today, we have at least 2 sessions on practical strategies. We have a quality assessment session. We have an AI session, which is followed by a practical example of how to incorporate artificial intelligence into ethics review. So, our aim this year has been really to try and provide operationalizable examples of how you and your ethics committees, either as chair, member, coordinator, or researcher, can really help to improve the process. We really hope you enjoy and learn this from this conference. Now, a couple of things I wanted to say. There have been some shifts in ethics in 2024. The update to the Declaration of Helsinki, is a fairly big shift. For a document that forms one of the cornerstones of our national statement and the way we think about ethics, to actually now incorporate patient and participant-centered inclusion as opposed to just physician responsibilities I think represents the paradigm that everyone should now be following to focus on patients, participants, and actually those that do the research and make sure safety and respect and dignity is accorded to all. And as you can see there, it really focuses also on research benefit and value and benefits, risks, and burdens. Now, I'm pleased to say our own National Health and Medical Research Council have been ahead of the game, and many on this call will be wanting to know whether or not Section 4 of the National Statement will indeed come out sometime this year. And according to Jeremy, the inestimable Jeremy Kenner from the NHMRC, it has been a tortuous time, but the update to Section 4 of the National Statement is due to be released in December 2024. Excuse me. I'm not going to say too much about that because this is Jeremy's role and he'll be talking at a coordinator session. But hallelujah, we are really excited because many who have caused a recourse to go back to the national statement and are constrained by the way in which the national statement suggests that research involving certain groups must be considered by a full ethics committee, certainly does not respect the sort of dignity, autonomy, and the risks associated with research. And I'm pleased to say that this new edition will help Australia to evolve and probably lead the world, by the way, in how we think about the inclusion of participant groups and how we should put into context their autonomy, their perspective, and standing in their shoes, which in some ways we haven't been able to do. So read that at your leisure. I won't talk about it too much, but we are very keen to hear from Jeremy as and when that occurs. I think that's on Friday morning. Okay, now another shift I wanted to mention is a really interesting one. As you can see, this is a paper on October 24. Under the revised American Common Rule, many psychology studies now require only a short application form vetted by the IRB. That may not seem seismic, but I think what it does is it's a recognition of the fact that sometimes we ask for a lot, and this at least seems to be an attempt to ask for less, at least in relation to psychology studies. Whether you agree with it or not is irrelevant at this time. It's just a thought-provoking paradigm shift that we in Australia should, and those who make the guidelines should consider for no other reason than we have to continually evolve to make sure that we are asking things that are essential versus nice to have, that are relevant, do not overburden researchers or participants, and try and get that balance right. So again, feel free to read at your leisure. This only came to me very recently, and I thought I would share that with you today. Now, final word from me, in terms of shifts in 2024, of course, as every year passes, people come, people go, and some people pass away. But this is about a community of ethics committees, members, chairs, researchers, coordinators. And it would be remiss not to recognize the extraordinary contribution that some people make. And we were saddened to hear earlier this year of the passing of one of our good friends, Rob Lobley, who was the chair of the Royal Prince Alfred Ethics Committee. Rob was the chair for around 30 years and passed away earlier this year. Now, 30 years in anyone's language is a career, but to be the chairperson for 30 years of a very busy committee is an amazing feat. Now, I'm not going to say any more because I'm now going to hand over to Prof. David Cook, who's the acting chairperson of the Royal Prince Alfred Ethics Committee, to, I think, do an appropriate tribute to Rob and recognise the amazing contribution Rob has made to ethics over the last 30 years. So David, over to you.
Thank you very much, Gordon. I'm joining, of course, from the Camaragal People's Country in the north of Sydney. What I thought I should do is try to show everybody how exactly extraordinarily broad Rob was. So if I can share my screen, is that permitted? Yeah. Okay, is that working?
All good, yep. Yeah, thanks,
Okay,
David.
perfect. All right. Go back. Okay, so I'm going to look at Rob from a number of angles. As I think you all know, he was a very distinguished immunologist. He had a particular interest in allergy, and we'll come to that in a few seconds. And as Gordon mentioned, he spent 30 years in roles connected to responsible conduct of research and ethical research across Sydney Local Health District, University of Sydney, and across Australia. Now, some of the ways his publication list, I think, shows you how unusual he was. After he did his PhD, or after he got his FRACP, he actually published a small book with a couple of very senior physicians at PA, David Cotillo and Bill Hensley, on acid-base disturbances. Sounds trivial, but apparently it was absolutely essential for interns to get a hold of this book, because it's the only one that actually explained this clearly for them. He then did a PhD with a leading research group, which went by the marvelous name of CIRCUS, the Clinical Immunology Research Centre of the University of Sydney. And a number of publications came out of his PhD, and they're noticeable for two reasons. One is in Nature, one is in Journal of Experimental Medicine, and a couple of other leading journals. There are very few people who get a PhD and end up with papers in Nature, Journal of Experimental Medicine, which were the leading journals at the time. So although he was a clinician, he was a very, very good laboratory researcher. What he was researching were called suppressor T cells those days. I think they're now probably best described as CD8 plus HREC cells, and play key roles in autoimmune diseases and allergies, which of course is where Rob ended up working. He went to NIH, did a postdoc, came back and got immediately plunged into the AIDS epidemic, which started in Australia in late 1982. As Gordon mentioned, he was appointed to the Ethics Committee at Prince Alfred in the early 90s, and in 1995, he became the chair of the HREC at PA, and immediately developed an academic interest in it, as you can see, with publishing widely letters and short articles on the ins and outs of ethics in Australia and beyond. And as part of his development of his career in allergy, he developed an interest in food allergies and wrote a number of important books for people with food allergies to help them deal with them, and developed also interest in what you might call the forgotten corners of medicine, things like chronic fatigue syndrome, Lyme disease, all the little bits of controversial bits of medicine that others were too busy to pay attention to. Now, I want to show one particular important example of Rob's contribution. These are a series of extracts from the Australian Society of Clinical Immunology and Allergy newsletter from 2003. And the news is simple. The EpiPen was actually approved by the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee for listing on the PBS, so people could actually get it for a reduced price. Now, the background of that, well, as you can see at the bottom of the slide, it says that Dr. Rob Ley should be congratulated. But what did he actually do? The story is, and I wasn't there, so I'm just going by what I've been told, was that when PBAC was considering EpiPen, he got into his car, drove down to Canberra, and in the back you had syringes and needles and vials of adrenaline, walked into the committee meeting and said, basically said, well, look, as you know, EpiPen, injecting adrenaline when somebody's having anaphylaxis is absolutely essential. You have to do it as quickly as possible. Here are some syringes, here are some vials of adrenaline. So let's see who can do it in under 15 seconds. And none of them could. And that was a very, very strong indication that they actually did have to approve it and not give way to people who say what happened, who are saying well, it's going to be very expensive and what happens to all the EpiPens will get wasted and things like that. So his ability to get things done was amazing. The PBS listing has one other thing which is very important, which is mentioned here, and was quite controversial at the time, because you didn't have to actually see an allergist to get, or an immunologist to actually get permission to use them. All you had to do is get your GP to ring up an allergist or immunologist to get permission, and that was a key advance, and very controversial, but it made sure that many people could get hold of the EpiPen relatively easily. And I think that's almost certainly due to Rob's insight and what's necessary to give people access to good medicine. And now I'm going to let the man speak for himself. I'm going to show you one hopefully short extract from a talk he gave in early 2023 at Sydney University, at Prince Alfred, which I think illustrates quite well.
I want to take you on a journey through time. As we go along the journey, mostly we're just going to be skimming across the wave tops. Every now and then we'll take a deep dive and look at some of the issues in a bit more detail. Occasionally we'll hover a bit and drill right down into them. So for those of you who are new to ethics, just quickly to define what we mean, ethics is a...
So he went on to give a very extensive overview of ethics, which covered things like smallpox and the smallpox epidemic in Sydney in 1789, which wiped out the Gadigal people, bar a handful who survived. He had pictures of the original consent form used by Walter Reed for the studies on yellow fever, and another thing which we'll come to in a few seconds. He's got a number of other contributions. As you can see, I won't go through them all. I've mentioned his important role in anaphylaxis and allergens, variety of working parties. He played a key role in actually getting clinical trials regulation through the Guardianship Board in New South Wales, somewhat more rational than it was at the time. And finally, I think he was extraordinarily supportive of research by nursing and allied health professions, and ensuring that all health workers were doing research. And he was very, very focused on improving the health and welfare of the community. I think that's probably, actually, I might just share this one as well.
He selected 22 published studies, which he used as examples, but his paper was rejected by JAMA, but eventually accepted by the New England Journal in 1966. But in the examples given, he gave no names or references to the particular experiments. It was different with Maurice Papworth in England, who was very much more forthright. He named names. He described experiments. He stimulated incredible hostile debate, but realized that self-regulation by the conscience of the individual experimenter was never going to be enough. He said, it's abundantly clear that voluntary control has not succeeded in the past and is unlikely to do so in the future. Interestingly, I have his book, and one of the references he lists is this one here, coming from the Royal Prince Alfred Hospital in 1954 from Professor Blackburn and colleagues, who was one of my mentors when I was training, done in the clinical research unit of C Block.
Anyway, so I think that illustrates very well Rob's capacity to go from the very general and abstract to the very particular and local, which I think was part of the secret of his great success. And then I'll just finish on this slide. This cartoon was actually the last slide in the presentation that Rob gave at the last HREC meeting last year. And it was about the skills required to be an HREC chair. And I looked for the cartoon and I found it in a business article. And as you can see, the title is Scrum Master Paradox, Herding Cats in an Agile Wonder World. And in many ways, I think that's very, very appropriate description of how Rob managed to achieve as much as he did. So thank you very much, everyone.
And thank you, David, for that. David, if you could stop sharing your screen, thank you so much. Well, that was wonderful, and I think Rob had a very dry sense of humor, but his contribution was an amazing one. He gave a talk at this conference last year, and I would say to everyone online that 30 years as the chair of an ethics committee is something that probably very few, if anyone else, will manage to recreate. I think it would do everyone a disservice if we didn't recognize such a contribution. Okay, now on with the show. What we're going to do now is we are actually going to formally allow the conference to be opened by the absolutely inestimable Professor Colin Thompson. Colin, amongst other things, and Colin, I'm sorry, your history is too long, but just let me say, Colin was chair of HREC, the Australian Health Ethics Committee, for several triennia, was instrumental in developing the national statement on, as we know it today, was involved with myself, amongst others, in the certification of many of the certified ethics committees, and has made amazing contributions to the field of ethics. We have in the past had privacy commissioners, chair of the NHMRC to open this, but Colin, may I say, I think I'm very pleased to have you help us out today by opening this conference. So I'm going to hand over to you now.
Thanks, Gordon. Let me congratulate you and the, I'm just looking at the screen, which has a picture of, I'm speaking to you from Ngunnawal country, Canberra. Let me congratulate you and the sponsors, with whom all I have enjoyed profitable and beneficial relations. Before I move on to just talk about opening the conference, let me acknowledge Rob Loblow's contribution as well, and thank you, David, for that comprehensive and informative account. And I can't avoid one Rob Loblow story. I mean, here's a person who was a renowned ethics committee chair of a very busy committee. He ran it very effectively and very efficiently. He was, the committee, as a number of others, was among the first to sought certification from the NHMRC in around 2012. So it was a rather awkward meeting with Rob to say that after the site visit, we had initially decided not to grant certification. And that conversation was not at all comfortable. It was, I don't remember the reason, but the likely reason is, and this was a case with a number of well-established committees, there was not a practice of incorporating in their minutes a clear indication that they had drawn on, referred to, and relied on the relevant sections or parts or principles of the national statement. And those deficiencies on appearance were readily remedied over the next 2 or 3 months. Back to the conference. As Gordon, you mentioned, this has filled a vacuum. I think it filled it extremely well. Followed, the initial vacuum began in 2007, and the university with which I was proudly associated, University of Wollongong, kicked off filling the gap that the NHMRC left by departing the field in 2008 by extending their annual HREC chair meeting to everyone, and from then other people picked it up. The Australian Ethics Network grew, ABLE grew, the Victorian Ethics Network grew, and then Health Translation Queensland and your sponsors have filled that gap enormously. The numbers are daunting. I remember running a training day in Canberra for the first NHMRC conference in 2003. And we wondered, oh, we might get 50 or 60 people. We had 320 people turned up. And we tried to run that as a face-to-face meeting, which was moderately successful, but not nearly as effective as the way you do this, which is just one further reflection. One of the important strengths of committees is difference. And if you looked at the composition of an ethics committee, you would think, well, that's a recipe for differences of opinion rather than commonality of opinion. And out of those differences, I think they should be applauded, welcomed, and drawn on. And I noticed that in your conference program, you're doing that, I think, in an estimable way. New arenas of research are being described, and their introduction to the ethics committee process then operationalized, to adopt that awful acronym. So I think you picked up a way of using this online medium, which is now, of course, regarded as the most efficient way of running not only HREC meetings, but lots of other meetings. But I just caution the value for ethics committees particularly of encouraging and welcoming difference, because out of those differences often come the most creative and appropriate resolutions to ethical dilemmas. With those trivial remarks, after David's eloquent account of Rob's contribution, let me hand over to Gordon and wish all of you well. I know I'm only speaking to a quarter of the people who will turn up in the next few days, but I have no doubt that the conference will be a great success. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Colin. And, you know, I would echo those words about differences of views. As you have highlighted, and I guess I've learned from you in this regard, it is the coalescence of all of this diversity that enables one to come up with the right outcome. And I think, you know, something we will talk about this morning in terms of quality assessment and ethics committees does reflect to some extent on the fact that you require that diversity of view from probably more people than we actually have on ethics committees to, you know, to recognize the diversity and potentially, you know, get where we need to go by taking all of those views into account. So I think those are very wise words. I'm very grateful for you making the time to open the conference for us, and hopefully you'll be able to stay online for some of today. And with that, let us move on.